Conflict is a natural part of human life. You know, it's like the weather. It is always with us in some form. Sometimes it is a gentle rain, a small disagreement between friends or family members that is easily resolved and actually helps the relationship grow. Other times it can feel like a hurricane, a powerful and destructive force that tears through communities, leaving deep scars and pain in its wake. We often think of conflict as something bad, something to be avoided at all costs. We associate it with shouting, fighting, and even violence. But this view is only a small part of the story, and it misses a crucial point about what conflict truly is and what it can become if we learn how to handle it with wisdom and care. At its core, conflict is simply a disagreement over goals, values, or resources. It arises when two or more people, or groups of people, believe that their needs or desires are incompatible with the needs or desires of others. Think about two children who both want to play with the same toy at the same time. This is a conflict. Think about a community where some people want to build a new factory to create jobs, while others want to protect the forest where the factory would be built. This is also a conflict. These situations are not inherently evil or destructive. They are simply moments where different human needs and perspectives meet and create tension, like two rivers flowing into each other. The real question is not how to eliminate conflict, because that is impossible. The real question is how we choose to respond to it. Do we see it as a battle to be won, where one side must lose for the other to triumph? Or do we see it as an opportunity, a signal that something in our relationships or our community needs to change? Conflict can be a powerful engine for positive transformation. It can shine a light on injustice, bring hidden problems to the surface, and force us to find new, more creative ways of living together. The energy of conflict can be channeled toward destruction, or it can be harnessed to build a more just and peaceful world for everyone. Understanding this dual nature of conflict is the very first step in mastering peace building. We must learn to look past the loud noises and the angry faces to see the underlying issues and the human needs that are not being met. When we see conflict not just as a threat, but also as a gift, a difficult, challenging gift, but a gift nonetheless, we open ourselves up to new possibilities. We begin the journey of transforming its destructive potential into a constructive force. This shift in perspective is what separates a peacemaker from a fighter. It is the foundational stone upon which all other peace-building skills are built, allowing us to engage with our world in a more hopeful and effective way. When we talk about peace, the first image that often comes to mind is the absence of fighting. We picture a quiet street where there are no soldiers, no bombs, and no loud arguments. This is an important kind of peace, and it is what we call negative peace. It is defined by the absence of direct physical violence. When a war ends and a ceasefire is signed, we have achieved a state of negative peace. People are no longer actively trying to harm each other. This is a critical and necessary goal, especially for communities that have been torn apart by violence. It is the first breath of fresh air after being trapped underwater, a moment of safety that allows for survival. However, negative peace is not the final destination. It is only the beginning of the journey. A community can be free from war, but still be filled with deep injustice, fear, and suffering. Imagine a society where one group of people is denied basic rights, cannot get good jobs, or is treated with disrespect simply because of who they are. There may be no open fighting, but there is no real peace either. This is where the idea of positive peace becomes so important. Positive peace is not just about stopping the bad things. It is about actively building the good things. It is about creating a society where justice, equality, and respect are woven into the very fabric of daily life. Positive peace is the presence of just and equitable relationships. It means that systems and structures are in place that support the well-being of every single person in the community. It means that when conflicts arise, there are fair and reliable ways to resolve them without resorting to violence or oppression. It means that children can go to school, that families have access to healthcare, and that everyone has a voice in the decisions that affect their lives. Positive peace is dynamic and alive. It is the sound of children laughing in a playground, the hum of a vibrant marketplace, and the thoughtful discussion of citizens working together to solve a shared problem. Therefore, the work of a peace builder is to move beyond simply stopping the violence. Our goal is to help cultivate the conditions for positive peace to flourish. This is a much deeper and more challenging task. It requires us to look at the root causes of conflict and address the injustices that fuel it. Building positive peace is like tending a garden. It is not enough to simply pull out the weeds, negative peace. We must also enrich the soil, plant the seeds of justice and compassion, provide water and sunlight, and protect the young plants as they grow. This long-term, patient work is what truly transforms a society and creates a peace that can last for generations. Conflict carries a price tag, and the cost is always devastatingly high. We often measure this cost in ways we can easily count, like the number of lives lost or the amount of money spent on weapons and armies. These numbers are staggering and represent an immense tragedy. Every dollar spent on a bullet is a dollar that cannot be spent on a book for a child or medicine for the sick. Every building destroyed in a war is a home, a school, or a hospital that must be rebuilt, taking precious resources away from building a better future. The economic cost of conflict drains a community's wealth, leaving it poorer and less able to provide for its people. But the true cost of conflict goes much deeper than what can be measured in money or statistics. The invisible wounds are often the most profound and the slowest to heal. Conflict destroys trust, which is the glue that holds a society together. Neighbors who once shared meals become enemies who fear each other. The social fabric unravels, leaving people feeling isolated, suspicious, and alone. Conflict also leaves deep psychological scars. People who live through violence carry the trauma with them for years, suffering from fear, anxiety, and grief. This pain is passed down from one generation to the next, creating a cycle of hurt that can be incredibly difficult to break. This is why peace is the most essential ingredient for development and human well-being. A community cannot thrive when it is constantly looking over its shoulder in fear. Development is about more than just economic growth. It is about expanding the freedoms and capabilities of all people to live the lives they value. This is impossible in a state of conflict. For a community to prosper, its members need to feel safe. They need to be able to plan for the future, invest in their businesses, send their children to school, and build relationships with their neighbors without the constant threat of violence hanging over their heads. Peace provides the stable ground upon which all other progress is built. When we invest in peace, we are making the wisest investment a society can make. The returns are immeasurable. In a peaceful society, resources can be directed toward education, healthcare, and infrastructure. People can unleash their creativity and entrepreneurial spirit, creating jobs and opportunities for everyone. Social trust can be rebuilt, allowing people to work together to solve common problems and build a shared identity. The well-being of the entire community improves as people feel more secure, connected, and hopeful about the future. Peace is not a luxury. It is the fundamental prerequisite for a healthy, prosperous, and flourishing society where every person has the chance to reach their full potential. To solve a conflict, we must first understand it. It is like being a doctor. You cannot treat a sickness until you diagnose its cause. Simply putting a bandage on a deep wound will not make it heal. We must look beneath the surface of the anger and the fighting to find the real roots of the problem. Conflicts rarely happen for a single reason. They are more like a tree with many interconnected roots, some visible near the surface, and others buried deep in the ground. These roots can be grouped into several key areas that feed the tensions and cause them to grow into open confrontation and violence. One of the deepest and most common roots is structural issues. These are problems that are built into the very systems of our society. Think of laws, economic policies, or social traditions that are deeply unfair to a particular group of people. When a system consistently gives advantages to one group while creating disadvantages for another, it creates a powerful sense of injustice and resentment. This could be economic inequality, where a small number of people control most of the wealth while many others struggle in poverty. It could also be a political system where certain groups are denied the right to vote or participate in making decisions that affect their lives. These structural problems create a constant pressure that can easily erupt into conflict. Another powerful root is related to our identity and culture. We all belong to groups that give us a sense of who we are, our family, our ethnicity, our religion, our nationality. These identities are a source of strength and meaning. But when one group feels that its identity, its culture, or its very existence is being threatened by another, conflict can become intense and emotional. This is often fueled by long histories of disrespect, prejudice, or violence between groups. Cultural conflicts can arise from misunderstandings, but they become truly dangerous when they are manipulated by leaders who use fear and us versus them language to gain power, turning neighbors into enemies by emphasizing their differences instead of their shared humanity. Finally, specific issues and interests act as the triggers that ignite the deeper underlying tensions. These are often the most visible causes of a conflict, like a dispute over a piece of land, access to clean water, or control over valuable natural resources like oil or minerals. These economic and political struggles for power and resources are the branches and leaves of the conflict tree. While they are the immediate things people are fighting about, they are almost always fed by the deeper roots of structural injustice and identity-based fears. A true peace builder knows that to create lasting peace, we cannot just trim the branches. We must address the root causes that give the conflict its life. When we are in the middle of a conflict, it can feel like being lost in a thick fog. Emotions run high, and it is hard to see the situation clearly. We only see our own point of view, our own pain, and our own needs. To find a path forward, we need a map. Conflict analysis tools are like maps that help us step back from the fog and see the whole landscape. They do not give us the answers, but they help us ask the right questions. They allow us to break down a complex and overwhelming situation into smaller, more manageable parts. By understanding the different pieces, we can begin to see how they fit together and where we might be able to intervene to make a positive change. One very simple and powerful tool is the ABC triangle. This tool helps us remember that every conflict has three main parts. A stands for attitudes, which includes the feelings, beliefs, and perceptions that people have about each other and the conflict. This includes stereotypes, prejudice, fear, and anger. B stands for behavior, which is what people are actually doing. This is the visible part of the conflict, like protests, arguments, discrimination, or violence. C stands for context or contradiction, which refers to the underlying root cause or the core problem that is creating the disagreement. This is the structural issue, like inequality or competition over scarce resources. The ABC triangle shows us that these three parts are all connected and influence each other in a continuous cycle. Another helpful tool is the conflict tree, which we touched on earlier. This tool uses the metaphor of a tree to help us separate the different levels of a conflict. The leaves, branches, and trunk are the visible effects of the conflict, the things we see and hear, like fighting, poverty, and people fleeing their homes. The trunk represents the core problem or the central issue of the conflict. But the most important part is the roots, which are hidden underground. The roots are the deep underlying causes of the conflict, such as a history of injustice, economic inequality, poor governance, or unresolved trauma from the past. The conflict tree reminds us that to solve the problem for good, we have to deal with the roots, not just the visible symptoms. A third tool, sometimes called the onion model, helps us look deeper into what people really want. On the outside layer of the onion are people's public positions, what they say they want, their demands. For example, we demand that you remove the fence you built on this land. If we peel back that layer, we find their underlying interests, the real reasons behind their position. For example, we need to be able to access the river for our cattle to drink. If we peel back another layer, we find their most fundamental needs, the basic human requirements for survival and dignity, like security, respect, and identity. Often, people's positions seem impossible to reconcile, but by understanding their deeper interests and needs, we can often find creative solutions that satisfy everyone. A large destructive fire often starts with a single tiny spark. If someone is there to notice that spark and put it out when it is small, the disaster can be avoided. Conflict works in the same way. Violent and destructive conflicts rarely appear out of nowhere. They almost always begin with small signs and signals, early warnings that tensions are rising. The great challenge and opportunity for peace builders is to learn how to recognize these early warnings and to act effectively to prevent the conflict from escalating into a raging fire. This work of prevention is often quiet and invisible, but it is one of the most powerful forms of peace building there is. Early warning signs can be subtle. They might appear in the language people use. For example, you might start to hear an increase in hateful speech, rumors, or propaganda that dehumanizes another group. Political leaders might begin using us versus them language more frequently, blaming a minority group for the country's problems. You might also see small changes in behavior, such as groups starting to segregate themselves, avoiding marketplaces or schools they once shared. There could be an increase in small-scale incidents, like street fights, vandalism of religious sites, or protests that turn tense. These are all signals that the social fabric is weakening and the risk of violence is growing. Once we notice these sparks, the next step is early response. The goal is to de-escalate the tension and address the underlying grievances before they explode. This requires courage and quick, thoughtful action. An effective early response might involve respected local leaders, like elders, religious figures, or teachers, coming together to publicly condemn hateful speech and call for calm. It could involve creating spaces for dialogue where representatives from different groups can meet to discuss their fears and concerns in a safe environment. Sometimes it involves working with the media to spread messages of peace and counter the spread of dangerous rumors with accurate information. The key is to act locally and quickly, using the trust and relationships that already exist within the community. Preventing conflict is always better, cheaper, and more humane than trying to stop it once it has become violent. It saves lives, protects communities from trauma, and preserves the resources that would otherwise be lost to destruction. However, prevention requires a different way of thinking. It requires us to be proactive, not reactive. It means investing in building strong, resilient communities where people have good relationships and trust each other. It means teaching peace education in schools, ensuring that political systems are fair and inclusive, and creating economic opportunities for everyone. This long-term work of building a culture of peace is the ultimate form of conflict prevention, creating a society that is less likely to produce sparks in the first place. At the heart of every effort to resolve conflict is this simple act of communication. But it is not just any kind of communication. When tensions are high, the way we talk and listen can either pour fuel on the fire or build a bridge across the divide. The skills of peaceful communication are not complicated, but they require practice and intention. They ask us to set aside our desire to win the argument and instead focus on the goal of understanding. This shift from debating to dialogue is the key that unlocks the possibility of finding common ground and moving forward together. It is an art that anyone can learn and that can transform our relationships not only in large-scale conflicts, but also in our daily lives. The most fundamental skill of all is active listening. This is very different from simply waiting for your turn to talk. Active listening means giving your full attention to the other person with the genuine goal of understanding their perspective, their feelings, and their needs. It involves listening not only to the words they are saying, but also to the emotions behind the words. You can show you are actively listening by using nonverbal cues like nodding and making eye contact. You can also reflect back what you hear them saying, using phrases like, "So, if I am understanding you correctly, you are feeling frustrated because..." This does not mean you agree with them, but it shows that you respect them enough to truly hear them. Another crucial skill is empathy, which is the ability to imagine and understand what another person is feeling. Empathy is the antidote to the us versus them thinking that fuels so much conflict. When we can step into another person's shoes, even for a moment, and see the world from their point of view, it becomes much harder to dehumanize them. Empathy is built by listening to people's stories and by being curious about their experiences. It is about asking questions like, "Can you help me understand what that was like for you?" When we connect with another person on a human level, we begin to see our shared humanity, and the walls of hostility and suspicion start to crumble. Finally, effective communication in a conflict requires us to learn how to express our own needs and feelings clearly and respectfully, without blaming or attacking the other person. A powerful technique for this is using I statements instead of you statements. For example, instead of saying, "You are always so inconsiderate," which puts the other person on the defensive, you could say, "When this happens, I feel hurt and disrespected because I need to feel that my contributions are valued." This approach focuses on your own experience and needs, which invites the other person to understand you rather than to fight back. By combining active listening, empathy, and clear self-expression, we create conversations that build bridges instead of walls. Ending the fighting is only the first step. After a conflict, a community is like a shattered pot. The pieces are all there, but they must be carefully and patiently put back together. This process of post-conflict peace building is complex and long-term. It is about much more than signing a peace treaty or rebuilding damaged buildings. It is about rebuilding the relationships, trust, and social structures that were destroyed by the violence. It is about healing the invisible wounds of trauma and injustice to create a new foundation for a shared future. This work, often called reconciliation, is about weaving a new web of relationships that is strong enough to hold the community together. A central part of this weaving process is addressing the harms of the past and seeking justice. This can take many different forms. For some, it means formal justice through courts and tribunals to hold those most responsible for atrocities accountable. For others, it means restorative justice, which focuses on repairing the harm done to victims and the community. This might involve truth and reconciliation commissions where people can share their stories and have their suffering officially acknowledged. It can also involve traditional justice practices, where elders help mediate between victims and offenders to find a path toward apology, forgiveness, and repairing the damage that was done. There is no single right way. The path to justice must be shaped by the needs and culture of the community itself. Rebuilding also requires a commitment to inclusivity. Peace cannot be built by a small group of elites behind closed doors. For peace to be sustainable, it must be owned by the entire community. This means that all groups, especially those who have been marginalized, must have a meaningful voice in the process. This includes women, whose experiences of conflict are often different from men's, and whose contributions to peace are essential. It includes young people, who represent the future of the society and bring new energy and ideas. It also includes former combatants who must be supported in finding a new, peaceful role in society. When everyone is included, the resulting peace is stronger because everyone has a stake in protecting it. Finally, weaving the web of peace involves providing support for those who have suffered the most. This means providing psychosocial support to help individuals and communities heal from trauma. It means providing economic support and livelihood opportunities to help people rebuild their lives and create a hopeful future. It means creating memorials and days of remembrance to honor the victims and ensure that the painful history is not forgotten. This work is about creating a society where people feel safe, respected, and cared for. It is slow, patient work that requires a long-term commitment, but it is through these many small, interconnected actions that a shattered community can become whole again. Peace is not something that is built only by presidents, generals, or famous diplomats in faraway cities. It is built in our homes, our schools, our neighborhoods, and our workplaces. Everyone has a role to play in weaving the web of peace, and every contribution, no matter how small it may seem, matters. The work of peacebuilding is carried out by a wide variety of actors, each bringing their unique strengths and perspectives. It is the collaboration between all these different groups that creates a strong and resilient movement for peace, from the highest levels of government down to the grassroots of a local community. Governments and international bodies play a critical role by creating the official structures for peace. They can negotiate peace agreements, pass laws that protect the rights of all citizens, and allocate resources for reconstruction and reconciliation programs. Non-governmental organizations, both local and international, are often on the front lines, implementing peacebuilding projects. They might run dialogue workshops, provide trauma counseling, monitor human rights abuses, or train community leaders in conflict resolution skills. Faith-based organizations are also powerful actors for peace, as their moral authority and deep community networks allow them to build bridges of trust and promote messages of forgiveness and reconciliation. However, some of the most important peace builders are often the least visible. Women are essential to building lasting peace. They are often the ones who hold families and communities together during conflict, and they bring invaluable perspectives on reconciliation and healing to the peace table. When women are fully included in peace processes, the resulting agreements are more likely to be successful and durable. Similarly, young people are not just the leaders of tomorrow. They are powerful agents for change today. They can challenge old hatreds, mobilize their peers for peace through social media and the arts, and build a new culture of tolerance and understanding for the next generation. So, what is your role? You can start by applying these skills in your own life. You can practice active listening with your family and friends. You can choose to stand up to prejudice and hateful speech when you see it. You can become more curious about the perspectives of people who are different from you. You can also get involved in your community. Consider designing a small peace project. It could be as simple as organizing a story-sharing evening between different cultural groups in your neighborhood. starting a club at your school to discuss social issues respectfully, or creating a small community garden. The first step is to identify a small division or tension you see around you. Then, think about one small action you could take to build a bridge. Learn from what works and what doesn't. And remember that every act of connection is an act of peace building.